So I lost the connection. This is the Institute of All Intelligent Life, and I'm Alan Kiesler. Today is Tuesday, the 22nd of November 2016, and peace be with you. I'm having problems with the connection. I did get it, and then I lost it. So I'm starting the class again. I'm going to sit down. As I mentioned in the last class, I hope we didn't lose the signal because it's quite cold today. So I have come outside where it's quite cold and difficult for me, but we will continue, or we will restart the class now. And well, I'm losing the signal again. I hope we can retain this. I'm afraid that it looks like the connection is going out again. So I really don't know what to do about this, having these problems with the connection to give the live class. But I will continue as long as, even if it's a weak connection. I guess you probably are getting pixelated pictures, but at least we can continue unless the signal is lost again. So I just want to talk a little bit today about understanding time and timelines. This is actually a very important topic because we really have a very limited understanding of time. We have the idea of time, as I've mentioned before, as a single stream. We think about time as a single stream, that events happen one after the other. And whatever has happened goes into the past, and we proceed on heading into the future, and it's just a single time line like that. Actually, that's a very simple idea which can work to some extent, but it's not really a very accurate picture of reality that we live in, or that we can live in. That is, we have chosen, collectively we have chosen to live within this sort of reality of a single timeline. But the fact of the matter is that just like we have 3 dimensions of space, we usually think about only 3 dimensions of space, namely you can say up, down, left, right, forward, backward, what are called in mathematics or in geometry the x, y, and z coordinates. So we usually think about time as being the 4th dimension, or a single dimension of time, but actually, just as space within the reality we're living in has 3 dimensions, so similarly time has 3 dimensions also. So we talk about past, present, and future as if the past doesn't exist anymore and the future doesn't exist yet, and only the present exists. In one sense it's true that only the present exists, but that's only from one perspective. Actually, the past and the future exist all the time also, and we can go into the past and future, just like I'm sitting here on my back porch in Esparto, California, and I can get up and move from here and travel to San Francisco or to New York, or I can travel to London or to Karachi or Lahore. I can travel anywhere on the surface of our globe, going north, south, east, and west. And I can also go up into the sky, out into space, or I can go underneath the surface of the earth. So for us, that's not strange to think about traveling to different places within space. But the idea of traveling to different places within time is a little more difficult for us to imagine. but we should start becoming familiar with these ideas because we are actually multidimensional beings. We don't live just in this reality that we ordinarily experience with our senses. So this gives rise to a lot of questions, a lot of interesting issues when we talk about time as being multidimensional, just like space is multidimensional. And one of the most interesting outcomes of this, which explains a lot of things that sometimes are difficult to understand, one of the most interesting outcomes of this is that we can create or generate different timelines. I'm just going to explain that. I've explained this before in a post that I made on my website called Timeline Wars and Love, but I want to go into that a little bit more. So I just want to explain first that time is, I gave the example there, more like a delta than a river. In other words, a river is a single stream, but when a river comes, especially in a very flat plain, as it enters the ocean, the river often spreads out into different channels because the land is so flat, so it can easily spread out. And many large rivers have deltas where they spread out into many different streams. So that's a very good example for us to understand, since we have the concept of time as a river, that time can spread out into different timelines. And what's very interesting about this is that we can choose different timelines. And different timelines can exist simultaneously, and different people can choose to live in different timelines. And we can actually switch from one timeline to another. Just like in a real river delta, sometimes the different streams in the delta rejoin each other, cross or rejoin each other. Or, to continue the example a little bit more, you can get out of one of the streams of the delta and cross over the land into another stream. So this is a very deep, profound, and can be confusing idea, but I want to just talk about one proof, one objective proof of the reality of this, and that is something that is very strange, and it's called the Mandela effect. I don't know if you've heard about it. If not, and you want to read about it, you can do a search on the internet for the Mandela effect. And what this is, and the reason it got this name, is because people, many people, remember things happening, and they're certain that it happened, but then they find out that that thing which they remember having happened did not happen. And this at first was just confusing to people, and they sort of set it aside as something that's not very clear. Maybe they made a mistake, but they were certain. So many people remember that Nelson Mandela, the famous South African leader, died in prison in the 1980s, about 1983, I believe it was. And people swear that they have that memory. But, as we all know, if we've studied a little bit about our history and accept the information that we've been given, and that Nelson Mandela actually lived long after that, and he was released from prison, and he became the president of South Africa after apartheid fell. And then he passed away again. A few years ago he passed away, but what was that earlier event of his death? And how did he come back to life, or what happened actually? So this is a very troubling thing. In fact, some people, one person especially I'm thinking of, who reported that he actually had written a report when he was a student in school in the 1980s. They studied current events, and one of the events that they studied was I'm sorry, I keep getting cut off. Even here, I've moved to a better location than in the classroom where we often got cut off, but even here now this is happening. So, I'm sorry, I keep getting cut off again and again. So I think we will have to end this class, um, but I will just try to conclude quickly. I see the connection is getting weak. We may get cut off again. I'm going to complain to my cell phone carrier about this happening. But I just wanted to end by saying that Nelson Mandela uh, evidently did die in the 1980s, but then something happened. So I was just saying that one person had studied in school current events in the 1980s, and one of the events he wrote a report on was the passing of Nelson Mandela in prison, and he still has a copy of that. He still has a copy of that report that he wrote in school as a student. But it was not what we experience now. So there are several different possible explanations of this, besides the existence of different timelines and a timeline switching. One is that Nelson Mandela really did pass away in prison, and then somebody maybe even created a clone of Nelson Mandela, but for some reason somebody thought it was important that Nelson Mandela not be dead, and so somebody else who looked like him posed as him or something. But one possibility we need to see. I'm sorry, I'm getting cut off again and again. So I just wanted to mention then that we have to consider the possibility that really the timeline that we were on was shifted, was changed, and we were moved to a different timeline. That is, all of us that are living here now and have this experience of Nelson Mandela having passed away just a few years ago, not having died in prison in the 1980s, although there's some memory of that among many people's minds. We have to accept the possibility that we were shifted to a different timeline, and that for some people especially, those memories can leak through from one timeline to another. So this is a very confusing, can be disturbing reality, but it does seem to me that we need to begin understanding and exploring this possibility, and I'll explain in a moment why. But we do need to consider the possibility of different timelines existing simultaneously, and that we can be shifted, or we can choose ourselves to shift from one timeline to another. So that's the reason why I was saying it's important for us to understand, because I'm quite convinced that we can shift our timelines. We can make a conscious decision, because what is it that generates time? The experience of time that we have is a result of our own conscious awareness of that time. So if we change our consciousness, we can actually change our timeline. We can generate a new and better timeline. And I've spoken about this previously when I've talked about the fact that the Third World War was destined, but it was changed, it was avoided. That means, to put it in the terms we're talking about now, that timeline was shifted. That's one way to describe it, that we were shifted from that timeline in which a third world nuclear war took place, and we are now on a better timeline, a higher timeline, a more loving timeline. So that really appears to me what has happened. And I'll just mention one more thing about this. I have talked about the secret space programs in which time travel has been implemented. And this is now, we're talking about 30, 40 years ago even, where in the secret space programs, time travel was discovered and it was practiced, it was implemented. And as a result of time travel also, people generate new timelines. They try to change their history, but actually all they do is they generate a new timeline, and they can go into that new timeline. The old timeline still exists. They don't really change history, but you can change the timeline that you're on by that practice. So it has been reported, again, this is very strange, but it has been reported, and I think it's certainly possible. Whether it's factual or not is another question, but it certainly can be, and we need to consider such possibilities, that the Nazis actually won. The Germans won the Second World War, and that led to quite an unfavorable development on our planet with the establishment of a world fascist dictatorship in which evil extraterrestrials played an important role. And then later, within this timeline that is from our future, some of us, maybe we could say, some of us, some earthlings, some human beings, went back into time and changed the outcome. Or perhaps it was extraterrestrials, what we would call extraterrestrials, who went back and changed that timeline, so that now we have all experienced, and we remember and we read in our history books, that the Nazis, Germans, Italians, the Japanese, the Axis as they are called, they lost the Second World War, and the Allies, England, United States, Russia, France, won the Second World War. So this is a very, very... I'm sorry, I've lost the signal again. It's just come back in a weak signal. So I am going to end now the class, just throwing this idea out there that we need to become aware of this possibility that different timelines exist. We can generate a very positive timeline by our own choice, by our own decision, by our own meditation and visualization and prayer. And that's why I've started this daily meditation session, which is happening at 6:30 a.m. in Pakistan time and 5:30 p.m. in California time, by that positive visualization of peace on earth, peace in Pakistan and around the world. I believe that we can actually influence events to happen in that direction. And if we don't want to do it, that's our choice. But if we want to call it an experiment, you can. But what can be the harm in this? We're trying something very powerful and positive to work towards peace just by the power of our consciousness and awareness, by our prayer and meditation. All right, I'm going to go back to the comments, and I hope that we don't lose the signal again. I'm going to make this short, I think, because we're having so many problems. This is the worst it's ever been as far as the connection has been. So Adnan Gondal asks, how do we switch? I believe you mean how do we switch from one timeline to another, or you mean then Ijaz, I'm not sure if it's your service provider or your area. What's happening? So it is the service provider, as far as I can tell. The signal is becoming very erratic, weak, and getting cut off all the time. So I'm not sure if Adnan Gondal means how do we switch from one timeline to another or one service provider to another, but we will switch to a better timeline if we have a positive attitude, very optimistic attitude. We can actually make sure that our desires for peace on earth can happen. So Vazim Rator asks, what is your views about earth? Is it round or flat? As per Islamic teaching, we know it's round, but why the West, this issue is getting height that earth is flat? I believe that this idea about the earth being flat is also a disinformation campaign being promoted by the cabal, just to confuse people and create doubts and confusion. I'm quite sure the earth is round. There may be another sense in which the earth is flat, but not in this dimensional existence that we're living in. Where we're living, the earth is round. So, and I'm quite certain that there are cabal agents who are promoting this idea of a flat earth. So Zainab Saad, do you think Mandela effect is caused by different timelines? Yes, that is my understanding. Ali Rao, do aliens exist? Yes, certainly. Um, as I've explained many times in this course, and in fact the whole purpose of this course, I personally have met extraterrestrials, and they are becoming increasingly active in our world right now, and they are helping us to live in a positive timeline, switching from the timeline of war and hypocrisy that we've been living in, where deceit and deception has been the order of the day, switch to a timeline of positivity, love, truthfulness, openness, and honesty. And as we increasingly develop telepathic abilities, you may have experienced something yourself, the human race is becoming more telepathic. So the more telepathic we become, the harder it will be for people to deceive us, and the harder it will be for people to tell lies. And eventually, not in the too distant future, I hope and pray, we will transform from what is called third density existence into fourth density existence, in which the whole planet becomes telepathic. And so the deceitfulness and hypocrisy of our past experience will be totally changed. Ijaz Itsham says it is similar to law of attraction or positive thinking. Yes, that is something that many people have studied and experienced. It is a fact that simply by thinking positively, you attract that. That law is there, that you automatically attract positive things into your life. So, Ramja Faizan, you are always doing live videos. Yes, I like to do these classes live so that we can discuss online people's questions. Ali Rao, if they do, then where are they, and why authorities are always trying to hide the truth? The extraterrestrials are here, and they are sometimes making themselves visible to us, but and they also live in other dimensions as well as on other planets. But why are the authorities trying to hide the truth? The main reason is because the authorities, the so-called authorities, they want to retain and increase their power and control over the population of Earth. And if knowledge of extraterrestrials becomes common, then they won't be able to retain their control, because their control depends upon the money system, the cheating money system that has been implemented all over our planet for a long time. And they control the money supply, and in that way they basically steal money from everybody. I've explained this before. I won't go into details now. And also, they control the world by the oil and energy industries, which everyone is forced to buy the oil from them. The same people that control the oil industry, they control the governments, they control the educational systems, they control many things. They're called the cabal. They're a small group of people I've spoken of before. So they are trying to hide the truth because they will lose that control through the money system, through the power system, because actually energy is available freely. It's called zero-point energy or free energy, and that is the system of energy production that extraterrestrials use. So if we find out about extraterrestrials, then we will learn about free energy. So the cabal will lose their control over the planet. So that's the main reason. And they've committed so many crimes against humanity in the process of trying to conceal these truths, that when extraterrestrials and the knowledge of extraterrestrials becomes common, they will no longer be able to conceal their crimes. So that's why they're trying desperately to prevent us from finding out about extraterrestrials. That's the real main reason. There are other reasons also, but that's the main reason. Wazim Rator, what's your views on HAARP? As we know, they are using HAARP for earthquake, tsunami, and other issues like climate change with chemtrails. Yes. HAARP is another secret program. That's another thing they can do with this technology and other technologies that are used in coordination with HAARP to create earthquakes and to control the weather. That is also the cabal's program to control the world, and that's one of the techniques they use, one of the secret technologies they're keeping secret, but it's coming out anyway, fortunately, because of the internet mainly. More and more people are finding out the truth about these things. All right, some skeptics, Adnan Gondal writes, may reject all these theories as conspiracies. What evidence do we have that extraterrestrials exist? There is a lot of very good evidence, very strong evidence, and one of the main evidences is that people have met them. Even presidents and prime ministers of countries have met them and have signed treaties with them, starting as early as the 1950s when President Eisenhower met with at least 2 or 3 different groups of extraterrestrials, and some of them were very good and they offered a treaty, but they requested that in exchange they would give a lot of technological information, technologies that would help the planet, but they asked that we give up our atomic weapons. And the United States government, military, was not willing to accept that. So that first group of extraterrestrials that the President of the United States, Mr. Eisenhower, met with, that treaty never was signed. The offer of technology exchange was not accepted because of that condition of giving up the atomic weapons. They were mistrustful. And then another group of extraterrestrials who were not good, they offered technology in exchange for being able to utilize animals and even human beings for their experimentation and for exactly what they didn't fully reveal, but Eisenhower agreed. They signed that treaty, and actually that extraterrestrial group did not follow the terms of the treaty fully, which was to inform the American government about any, at least American citizens that were being abducted and exactly what was being done to them, and they couldn't harm them. But so that's one evidence. You just have to understand that the mass media is controlled by the same cabal that is trying to prevent this information from coming out. So you won't find this information on TV or in your newspapers. But you have to do research on your own. The information is available, and you have to use your own discrimination to be able to tell what is true and what is not true. But this information is widely available on the internet now. All right. I think just in conclusion of that question about what evidence is there, there is a lot of evidence also of extraterrestrial craft being seen, UFOs, and that is very, very strong, good evidence. And there is also evidence of military and intelligence officials who have become whistleblowers and have spoken publicly about this. You can see the disclosureproject.org has a lot of that sort of information. And even better perhaps, the best source of this information that I've found is Corey Goode and David Wilcock. They are doing a series called Cosmic Disclosure. So if you go to Corey Goode's website, which is spherebeingalliance.org, you can just do a search on Corey Goode, C-O-R-E-Y-G-O-O-D-E, and he has posted a lot of information there. It's very, very good evidence, especially with the appearance as a whistleblower or as talking about the secret space programs of William Tompkins. You can find out more about him from Corey Goode's website also. So there's really overwhelming evidence. And if people don't want to believe it, they won't. But if you're open-minded, willing to accept the truth, then I have no doubt that you will be able to find evidence, clear, strong evidence. And of course, for me, there's no question since I have myself personally met extraterrestrials. So you live here just to answer the questions of peoples, Ramsha Faizan. No, but I'm happy to answer whatever questions I can that people are asking. Adnan Gondal, you do lose credibility in so-called sane world when you say something extraordinary. We are not willing to think outside the box, sadly. Yes. The fact of the matter is that we have been put inside of a box, a very small box, the box of modern science and education, the box of modern media and politics, the whole system that we have been taught from childhood by our educational system is a very tiny box that we've been locked up in. So when we try to get out of that box, we lose credibility amongst the so-called sane world. Very good comment, yes. It is sad, but fortunately, it is changing. The truth is coming out. People are opening and getting out of that little box, and it is increasing more and more. So Ali Rao says, we are the ET, that's a fact. Humans don't belong to this planet, as also mentioned in Quran and First Testament, that Adam and Eve were sent to the earth. Very interesting, yes. If you study our genes, that is now the human genome has been deciphered, fully decoded, and the fact of the matter is that some of our genes are actually extraterrestrial genes, that even modern science is realizing that, although it's not being broadcast in the mass media. So we certainly, in one sense, we are ETs ourselves. That's a fact. Okay, Men in Black is a documentary made by Russian is also another proof. Yes, there is an excellent documentary called Men in Black. It's different from the Hollywood movie called Men in Black. There was a documentary made by the Russians called Men in Black. You can find that also. It's full of proof of extraterrestrials. Thank you very much. Adnan Gondal, I have done plenty of research. All these theories out there, either extraterrestrials are helping capitalists or they are capitalists themselves. Well, I'm not sure quite what you mean here. Different groups of extraterrestrials have supported different political factions on our planet. And as I mentioned earlier today, the Germans, the Nazis, were helped by some extraterrestrials to win the Second World War. And then that timeline was later changed. So some extraterrestrials were helping the fascists, and some extraterrestrials were helping the Americans and English during the Second World War. So I think that the extraterrestrials, the good ones at least, they don't really discriminate. They will help anyone that is willing to accept their help and will abide by their conditions for that help. The fact is that the same good extraterrestrials whose help was rejected by the Eisenhower administration, they went and helped the Russians, who at that time, of course, were Soviet communists. So they don't discriminate on the basis of somebody's political or economic views, as far as I know. I think some different groups of ETs have been helping different groups of Earthlings. That is pretty well established. All right, Saima Aziz Mirza again. I guess Russians are doing at the level of government. Yes, the Russians are doing much better, certainly better than the Americans and many other Western European countries, in terms of revealing the truth about extraterrestrial presence. The Russians are working with good extraterrestrials to try to establish a cabal-free planet. They're fighting against the cabal, and of course the cabal is mostly established in Western Europe and the United States. So this fight is going on, and it's not just a fight between the Russians and the Americans, or the Russians and the Western Europeans and Americans. It's a fight between extraterrestrial groups also. That the Orion group, the reptilian group, has been supporting the cabal, working together with the cabal, and the Sphere Being Alliance, and an alliance of extraterrestrials and Earth-based secret space programs and other Earth-based good people, is fighting against the cabal and their extraterrestrial allies, and they're winning. So it's not going to be long before all this comes out, even on the level of the mass media. It may be very, very soon. I don't know. I used to think it might be 10 or 20 years, certainly not 50 years, but maybe quite a few years like that. But now I'm thinking it's going to be less than 10 years that the whole situation on the planet will change as the extraterrestrial presence is revealed and the cabal is exposed. And the leaders of the cabal, the international banksters, the international multinational corporation CEOs, the European royalty, they will actually be arrested and tried. So this is going to happen in the not too distant future, God willing. Okay, I'm just checking the time. Our time is almost up. So, Gemma Art, can you point out or identify those in Pakistan who are working for the evil and wrong ones, I mean cabal? Well, practically every government in the world is controlled by the cabal, and the leaders of the government are working with the cabal. They're accepting bribes, basically. They're accepting different inducements to work with the cabal, and they're succumbing to threats by the cabal. If you don't work with us, you will be harmed, and your families will be harmed. So that's what happened to Obama, as I've explained before. I think he may have been a good man, but when he became the president, he was threatened that if he doesn't do what the cabal tells him to do, he and his family will be harmed and even killed. So every government in the world, with a very few exceptions, the Russian government is the main exception. The Chinese government may be also like Russia, and of course there are some governments that are not under the cabal's control, but practically all of the governments in the world are quite strongly influenced by the cabal, at least if they're not totally in their control. Saim Aziz Mirza, another proof is an interview on RT by a Canadian defense minister. I heard it myself where he admitted that he knows things about species of ETs. Yes, there are many. That was Paul Hellyer you're talking about, who formerly was a Canadian defense minister. He is perhaps the highest ranking government official, at least from the Western European and North American countries, who have spoken openly about his knowledge of extraterrestrials. But there are many, many persons, as I mentioned a little earlier, including military and intelligence witnesses who directly participated in exchanges with extraterrestrials, such as finding and recovering extraterrestrial craft that had crashed. So just do your research. You can find out. There's plenty of evidence about the existence of extraterrestrials. Okay, and the last question. I'll make this since our time is up. Usuf Naim asked, Cabal is also in Pakistan. What you say about this? Yes, the Cabal is everywhere, all around the world. And the fact that governments of the world are so corrupt is an indication that the cabal is manipulating them, bribing them, and they are protected by the cabal, so they think they can get away with this sort of criminal activity of cheating their countries, stealing all the money of their countries, etc. But it won't last long. Praise God. Thank you very, very much. I'm sorry that we had so many interruptions. There were at least, of course, I started the class and then got cut off completely, so I had to restart it. But it looks like things turned out a little bit better later. But I am going to complain to my cell phone carrier about this and see if I can rectify it so it doesn't happen so much in the future. Anyway, thank you very much for bearing with me, and we will see you tomorrow, God willing. May God protect us all.